Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Jule Collins-Smith Museum of Fine Arts at Auburn University. I'm Imani Poole, a senior majoring in mathematics. Tonight, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to a talk with art historian Alexander Nemerov. Our event tonight is being recorded and will be available on the museum's YouTube channel. If you are here in person, please remember to silence your cell phones. And now, to introduce this evening's program, please join me in welcoming Chris Malinsky, the Janet L. Nolan Director of Curatorial and Educational Affairs at the Jule.
Thank you, Imani. Good evening, everyone. It's so great to see you. As Imani said, my name is Chris Malinsky, and I am the Janet L. Nolan, Director of Curatorial and Educational Affairs here at the museum. And I'm so glad that you've joined us for this evening's conversation with Alexander Nemerov. A distinguished scholar of American culture, Alexander Nemerov explores our connection to the past and the power of the humanities to shape our lives. He's the Carl and Marilyn Thoma Provostial Professor in the Arts and Humanities at Stanford University, where he recently chaired the Department of Art and Art History from 2015 through 2021, and has been named by the student newspaper, the Stanford Daily, one of the university's top 10 professors. Alex received his undergraduate degree from the University of Vermont and his PhD in the history of art from Yale. His most recent two publications include The Forest, A Fable of America in the 1830s, which presents tales of a visionary experience in the last years of America as a heavily forested land. And the book we're here to celebrate tonight, Fierce Poise, Helen Frankenthaler, and 1950s New York, which was listed by many as one of the best books to read of 2021. Among his many other remarkable engagements as a scholar, in 2017, he delivered the 66th Andrew W. Mellon Lectures at the National Gallery of Art, becoming the first scholar to deliver them with a focus on American art. Tonight's event is advertised as a book talk, and indeed it is. It's something of a culminating convening around this wonderful book, Fierce Poise, and a celebration of our exhibition, Women Artists in Ascendance, which includes Frankenthaler's remarkable 1955 painting, Blue Territory, which you can see featured on the cover of the book. Over the past few months, we've been using Alex's book as a collective community reading through formal gatherings like a book club run in partnership with the independent bookstore Auburn Oil Booksellers, and through many acts of informal, independent reading, encouraging people. I can't tell you how many times I've said to an Auburn student, you should read this book, or placed a copy of the book in the hands of an Auburn professor. Before I pass the mic to Alex to talk more about Helen Frankenthaler and the remarkable constellation of artists that surround Frankenthaler as kind of seen through our exhibition, I'm looking forward to it. I'd like to briefly thank some of our partners in producing this particular exhibition, Women Artists in Ascendance, including our friends at Art Bridges, an organization founded by Alice Walton to get American art out of storage and into communities nationwide, and the Whitney Museum of American Art, who generously lent works for the exhibition as a part of the Art Bridges Partner Loan Network. I'd also like to thank the Columbus Museum for lending a spectacular painting by Alma Thomas, our friend Preston Phillips, Auburn class of '73, for the loan and promised gift of a painting by Buffy Johnson, and the artist Amanda Williams for lending her incredible painting made of Alabama red clay. One of the spectacular thrills of this exhibition is that it does feature so many stars from our collection here at Auburn. And if you haven't seen the exhibition yet, you'll have a few minutes after the talk tonight. I'd also like to extend my deepest appreciation to all of our other museum partners and the entire museum staff for the important work surrounding this exhibition and program tonight. I'm grateful to our museum donors for their investments to present these and other programs, and to our leadership here at Auburn, Auburn President Christopher B. Roberts. Following the lecture and conversation, we'll have time at the end for questions from the audience, so please be thinking of questions you'd like. I'll go around and pass the microphone. And at the end of the event, we'll have time for a book signing, and we have copies of the book available in the gift shop if you'd like a signed copy before you leave this evening. Now, please join me in welcoming to Auburn, Alex Nemerov.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. I want to say that when I was a little kid, I think I was about 8, and it was the early 1970s, I somehow thought that I wanted to go to Auburn for college. Like, that was my thing. I grew up in Missouri, so it was just a kind of fantasy, but this is the first time I've ever been here. I remember I used to subscribe to something called the Sporting News, and my very first issue had on the cover a guy in that beautiful Auburn uniform, a guy named Pat Sullivan, who was a quarterback. And I thought, wow, that's cool. That's really cool. And I have to say, though, it's shameless, and you might think, well, tomorrow night I'm giving a lecture at the University of Alabama, and I'm going to say the exact opposite of what I'm about to say now. But it is true. It's just a fact that I always rooted for Auburn versus Alabama. It's just a fact, just saying. I also want to say this is a beautiful museum, and I'm really grateful for Chris for inviting me, and Isaac for bringing me here, helping with all the logistics, and also just so touched by the space and finding it to be a very welcome place to look at works of art. And just today looking at the Amanda Williams painting, but also the Mose Tolliver picture and the Purvis Young picture, and a number of others, really, really breathtaking. Jimmy Weaver, really beautiful paintings that make a difference in my life and remind me, as I'm sure you all think about too, of why we come to museums, which is to be changed. So today I want to talk with you and then hear your questions about like this exhibition, but in particular, I want to take us through, so the show is called Women Artists in Ascendance, take you through 3 of these artists really in the show. Helen Frankenthaler, we've just heard a bit about, Grace Hardigan, who was her frenemy, you could say, and then the much less well-known but really gifted Alice Baber. And I'll make a remark or two about Buffy Johnson's picture too. But I want us to think tonight about being an artist who was a woman in the 50s and what that's about. But what I really want to explore tonight with you all is something that goes beyond this exhibition. It's to do with the livingness in art, like how you make, whether you're an artist or not, like how you make, how you regard an art as a living thing as opposed to like a desiccated piece of the past, right? And so how can we live through an art that we regard as living? And I, no secret, regard all of these pictures as living pictures. So I want to think with you tonight about what that means. So with the Frankenthaler, it perhaps just at a minimum, one could say, it's such a bursting kind of picture. That's a word that came to my mind just looking at it just a few yards from here. Certain things like word like elevation, which is implied in just the vertical structure of it, but these V shapes, these ecstatic V shapes going up, something to do with like bursting vegetation, this kind of bowling ball of a shape, which seems almost like it's plunging or submerging into an aqua here, and one of Helen's nicknames was Helen Ocean. Also seems to be a kind of pod emerging, let's just call it life, like some notion of, paintings are not where life goes to die, they goes to be born, or remind us that life is renewing itself constantly. And a picture to be what Helen, and I'm using her first name, which got me into a lot of trouble when I wrote my book, but whatever. Helen, her word for this would be, it's a terrific picture, terrific. So terrific would mean something like, wow, like there's life here. It's 1955, so it's what, 70 years old, this painting? It really is not ridiculous to say it looks like it was painted yesterday. So that's a thumbs up if you're an artist. But let's think about it. Whose life, what life? It's got to be her life in a way, right? So let's just check in a little bit with Helen, who was born in 1928, who made the painting, therefore, when she was 27 years old. Here she is 7 years before, just about going into her senior year at Bennington College in southern Vermont. And that building behind her, you see just a little bit, is the Commons in Bennington and College. And in the third story are the artist studios. So she's kind of proudly in front of the painting studios where she spent a lot of her time as an undergrad. The smile, the Helen smile that people talk about, and Helen laugh is another thing people talk about. We want to make sure we take as a complicated, not all that it appears, phenomenon. This is someone who basically fell apart when she was an adolescent, to when she was a young person, when her father died suddenly, or after a brief illness when she was 11 years old in 1940. And not long after that, she suffered all these sort of psychosomatic illnesses and was, in her word, a mess. And painting in classes she took as a high school student in New York at her fancy high school kind of brought her out of that. And it's not wrong to say saved her life. She went to Bennington intellectual artistic school to this day, and kept up with her painting. And let's just think a little bit more about her undergrad days. I love this piece of paper, which I found in the archive, which is among stacks of the same, and which you might think, without reading the label on the right, is one of Helen's own notebook pages. And keep in mind, what we're doing here is creating the sense of the life that goes into the work. But it's actually not by Helen, and it's by one of her good friends, Sonia Rudikoff, who is much more bookish and much more intellectually driven than Helen. Helen's smarts had to do not with detailed scholarly analysis of things, but I think it's still a very, to use the word of the show, analytic, or ascendant bit of doodling here, I always think of these as kind of Helen rising up in these Picasso-like angels, even inverted, as still being kind of amazingly ascendant somehow. And it speaks to, this is from the psychology class taught by a guy named Eric Fromm. It speaks to the exhilaration of learning that is a part of this too. This painting, when you go out and look at it again after the talk, like the vibrancy, the sort of electricity of it comes out of a certain wall-to-wall pleasure in inscribing, noting, creating spontaneously, doodling, in effect, into a kind of beautiful, lucid conjecture of human beings' possibilities to be risen up. When Helen graduated, she went back to New York. She grew up in the Upper East Side. She insisted on moving down to the Chelsea neighborhood as a young woman just out of undergrad, and her mother was so, so Upper East Side bound that she was shocked that Helen would live all the way down in the Lower West Side. But this is her with her buddy Gabby Rogers, who went on to become a film actress, at a big costume ball at then the biggest ballroom in the entire United States, on the 9th floor of the now no longer existing Hotel Astor. And there are different kinds of cutouts, collages, and mobiles here to benefit the artist. Helen is dressed as Picasso's Woman Before a Mirror, with the balloons as breasts and the shower curtain as the wallpaper and the mop as the hair. Woman with a Mirror Gabby's a fashion model. In any case, it's that smile again. That smile that has a kind of, we know from what I told you, a kind of despondency as well. Depression, not to put too fine a word on it. But it's at this very time, in fact, only 4 days before, that she met a fateful figure in her life, a critic, the most famous and wisest American art critic of the entire 20th century, Clement Greenberg, 20 years her elder, who was very smitten by her, and she was smitten by him, and they began a 5-year tumultuous, dysfunctional relationship that did have the singular virtue, however, of introducing Helen to Jackson Pollock, whom Greenberg had discovered, and bringing her into the art world as a kind of young artist. And it was this extremely masculine art world. If I show you this photograph of Greenberg, the critic, resplendent in fur coat, art critics really did it fancily at the time, and Helen in alpaca. They're in upstate New York at the outdoor sculpture garden of this man, David Smith, very accomplished artist that Greenberg also, quote unquote, discovered, who's with his young wife, Jean Fries, 7 months pregnant at the time. And then these two gals, future psychoanalyst, Jennifer Feely, future anthropology professor at University of Michigan, Jillian Feely, both of whom are daughters of Helen's art teacher at Bennington, who probably took the photograph, Paul Feely. Anyway, it's Valentine's Day, but things aren't going well because they're going to break up soon. And it kind of, gets us into the livingness in the work that's on view in this museum, a work that I've described as ascendant, yet here, curiously, Helen is actually sitting on top of in this photograph by the great photographer Gordon Parks. And she's doing so for the Life magazine feature from which this exhibition takes its title, Women Artists in Ascendance. But, let's just think about it as a kind of narcissistic mirror here, a pool, and think about, is it a reflection? It's such a logical thing, whether we're talking about this or anything else, like, oh, the artist is reflected in their art, like we probably all said that. So coming back to blue territory, we could probably be forgiven for thinking, well, the blue territory, whether it's blue of depression/beauty, is personal and is a personal expression in some kind. There's only one problem with that. It's not right. It's too simple. And Helen would have been really ticked off if I could hear her from beyond the grave right now, hearing me listening in on Zoom or something like that. She would probably say, that's wrong. And it's true, it's wrong. She hated that idea of like the work of art as a diary. Did it come from her? Did it come from her personal experiences? Of course it did, but that's like that's the match to make the flame. It's not the flame. So that's the first thing. We have to say, okay, the livingness is kindled by the artist, their personal experience, but it's not, therefore 100% synonymous with it. It's a living thing, independent of the artist who gives it life. And I would say that's a good maxim for any artist. So, in where I live in Palo Alto, like I saw this photograph of a woman making one of these temporary pastel drawings you see sometimes on the street. And it brought to mind Parks's photograph here, but with a telling difference. Whereas in this picture, you could say, consciously or not, the figure is a kind of literal mirror reflection, a kind of genie-like amplified image of the artist who makes the pavement into a kind of liquid pool. This isn't quite the same. And abstraction is lovely for Helen and a lot of people who found it because it invites the mind into something beyond the literal, And so it would be a very literal formulation to say, oh, it's about her life. For example, she and Greenberg broke up in 1955, so there must be something to that. And you could extend it and look at other pictures she made in that year, 1955, like this one, Holocaust, and say, okay, I'm going to read these, psychologically. I'm an undergraduate at Auburn, or I'm a PhD student somewhere. I'm going to read this psychologically, but no, I don't think that's right. It is interesting that there are very few paintings Helen made in 1955, big ones, so it's a relatively rare thing we have. It was a down, depressed year for her, but still, let's pursue this idea of the livingness in these pictures that, by the way, have got their titles when? After she made them. And Helen was very insistent about that, because people always want to say, for example, about this, well, it's about the Holocaust. What? She's like, no. I don't make pictures to be kind of disguised representations of things that could be discussed literally. I just come up with my titles after I've finished them, and I do it in a very associative, freestyle, but kind of pinpoint way. She was good at titles. So in any case, the livingness, the explosive kind of, fertile generativeness of these pictures in their different palettes is to do with something that's kindled by her but goes beyond her. And I do want to say that the livingness is religious. Helen, in 1953, she went to Madrid at a time when very few Americans went, but the Spanish fascist dictator Franco was actually encouraging American tourism to Spain at that time, because it was sort of like, if we're both enemies of communism, then let's get together and have some Americans come to Spain. So Helen, intrepidly, single woman, went there. She loved the religious painting like El Greco's Saint Sebastian here. And what I'm asking you to see here is a little bit of the ecstatic vibe of El Greco in this. Here's another El Greco from Madrid, from the Prado, that she would have seen, and these the X-shaped cross of St. Andrew. I'll just compare with the V shapes, the gull shapes in Blue Territory, and you might say, well, then let's put this together and say, what is that then? He, meaning me, is saying there's something about livingness that has a kind of otherworldly quality to it. I don't think that's wrong. Some of you may have heard the phrase a religion of art, which is what scholars and others might describe, might term for an art that is, say, comes from the mid-19th to the mid-20th century. And very, very simply put, Nietzsche has this phrase from the 1880s, and it's simple. It's God is dead. And we could talk about that, but he basically means the decline of belief and faith. And the idea is, what is a replacement religion? Art can be it. It can produce that kind of feeling of grace, of being saved. And it becomes, in that sense, an alternate religion, another space to find oneself, to be saved, to be discovered, to be awakened. And it does so in a what's stereotypically understood to be a conformist society. So to go from El Greco's standing men now to another standing man, the one who graces as an anonymous figure, a silhouette, a cog in the machine, the cover of a novel published the same year as Frankenthaler's painting was made, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, which is about the hurt, the pain, the sort of deeply repressed traumas that basically course through the head of every seemingly privileged, competent and sane person waiting for the 913 to take him from Westport, Connecticut into Manhattan, right? So just taking a step back now, almost like if I had a whiteboard and I was drawing up what we have so far, it's like religious ecstasy instead of anonymity, livingness instead of slowly dying. And you could give Helen some real props here for being at age 27, because she was being asked pretty much to kind of go into the feminine or female version of this here, to become a mom, to give up her painting career. We could give her props for instead making a kind of work that proposes just the opposite as a principle of life. And moreover, just to be clear, is doing it without any appreciation of what she's doing, except for Greenberg and a couple other people, right? There's, not only is there no market for this, there's no even recognition of it even as a painting. So I don't want to get too heroic here, but I'm just calling it as a fact. This is odd, but there's a livingness that is at the end of it. It's not just style or quote unquote being an artist. There's something desperate, like life affirming, life saving in that. And Helen did have friends who jumped off of bridges and things like that, women, and these artists, including her, are definitely not unacquainted with sadness, right? So, but there's some principle here that feeling blue is part of the livingness that we embrace. And you could even say, if you'll allow me one bit of shameless editorialization, is being AI'd out of existence now, all in the name of our betterment, right? The lightest touch is the most living one. That's something, a paraphrase of what Helen said when people would rag on her for making art that seemed like, quote unquote, my kid could do it. She's trying, as we look at this picture called Eden, to find a something, and maybe we can all relate to this, whether we're artists or not. Like, you're making something and it feels really delicious and alive with the first few strokes. And then you start to work it and work it and work it, and it starts to become cold and frozen and fossilized, and before you know it, dead. So she's trying to leave off before it gets frozen. So a lot of bare canvas. And I would say if you look at this, it feels very much like a room. The room in which she painted it in her studio there on West End Avenue, because she'd moved from Chelsea by this point, painting it in the way that Pollock inspired her to do, that is by having the canvas on the ground. The implication of that for livingness here is that, to paint one's immediate situation is to make the sun come up. To know when to stop is a personal decision. There ain't no cosmic stuff here about the meaning of mankind. It's all personal. It's all in one space, but it doesn't mean it's a personal diary, I think the word honesty comes up here, like, honestly speaking, what can I, what can you, what can she do as an artist? Well, I can try to portray the very space in which I'm making the picture, and I can evoke in a kind of spontaneous fashion some of the emotions, let's call it the lift, that's implied in even an ordinary surrounding. I can think about, the contradiction in Helen's work between stuff that's painted on the ground and stuff that is meant always to be shown high on the wall. And I can think about the word freedom as it relates to being an artist too. Do what what do we say now? Like, you do you, or whatever. You're like, oh God, that's terrible. Ugh. You can see why my students think I'm kind of a curmudgeon, but good thing I don't read my evaluations. But anyway, Freedom is actually much trickier. And let's take the 1950s version of it. Erich Fromm, the professor whose class Helen's friend was taking the notes in, had this book called Escape from Freedom. Escape from Freedom, that's interesting. What's that? It's an American thing. It's more than an American thing, but Erich Fromm, who's an emigre, is noticing it. It just means what he's noticing. Why do Americans, they really flee? They flee from the idea of having some free time. Why do they spend their Sundays driving to these kind of roadhouse restaurants, is what he says, or like sitting for hours in a movie? It's because existentially, freedom is the scariest thing of all. Too much possibility. And so just in the manner of all of us who, if you're like me, would rather spend 12 hours putting in an honest day's work and answering emails and being helpful to people and so on, rather than staring at the clouds. The opposite of too much possibility is too much necessity. Like, nope, can't do it. I would love to do it. I would just love to blah, 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 blah. I can't though. I gotta do what? Gotta mow the lawn? Gotta take out the garbage? Gotta have a meeting? Have a hard stop? That's one of my least favorite phrases. She's trying to be between those two things, and that's making a painting in any circumstance. Too much possibility, disaster. Too much necessity, cold as ice. How about having a structure that allows you to roam in a space of opportunity and openness? And then you have only your own wits about you to make of it what you will. Because you're not El Greco. The conditions in which El Greco made his work are gone forever. You're on your own. You're making art in a time when there's really no recognition of what art even might be in the world, except maybe vaguely for a few people that it has a kind of uplifting significance. So the way I write it is a free picture. What is a free picture? Like truly a picture of freedom. It should have the feeling of still forming, ascending, becoming to this day, which rhymes with what I said about Blue Territory at the start. Now, I want to introduce just briefly with this picture, Eden on the screen, a critic of everything I've said, which is this guy, this handsome man, Herbert Gold, who just passed away at age 99 very recently, who was Helen's boyfriend after the breakup with Greenberg. And Herb Gold was a novelist. He was a friend of Saul Bellow. And he just thought, as a storyteller, he told me, he said, I just wondered, is this just some smart, hip Bennington girl just pushing colors around? Is this all kind of a joke somehow? She was serious about it, but he's just thinking there was something kind of pretentious about it and not believable. So he wasn't buying it. He wasn't buying what I was saying. I was respectful of her, but he's of interest in our story because he broke up with Helen and he went on to date someone else in the exhibition. Interesting. Alice Baber, who, as I mentioned, is not well known at all. And this is actually the first time today that I've ever seen an Alice Baber painting in person, and I love it. And in many ways, I kind of regard her as a heroine because she didn't promote herself, which was another thing that gave Herb Gold the creeps about Helen. Actually, he thought she was too concerned with who was the most important person in the room, kind of thing. Whereas Alice Baber was just living in a little studio down in Greenwich Village and truly didn't care about things. Alice Baber's the same age as Helen. They're both born in 1928. She's painting in a very different way. Alice Baber is about livingness too, totally. You can see already how beautiful it is to suddenly feel like, wow, I can start to see the real life stakes of the different artists here. Alice Baber says she started as a still life painter, then she was pretty soon thinking about just colors and about, in her words, celestial garden, tree of life, the rim of the universe. That's what she was going for. Like this kind of NASA cosmos. And she said yellow is the crudest, crustiest, nastiest color to work with. You just squeeze it out of the tube and it's very uninspiring, but you turn it into the color of ivory held up to the window. Isn't that nice? You're such a poet. She said black, which she didn't use, was the color of Goya, Velázquez, gangster cars, and inside of cannons. Fantastic. With these two pictures side by side, you could look at them and ask the following question, though, about livingness. Do you know who, this is just my opinion, you might have a different one, but when I look at this picture, Buffy Johnson, I feel like her genius, her inspiring figure is Van Gogh. You know, and that's interesting. Like doing Van Gogh in the 1950s, many people were doing their version of it. Van Gogh, and I'm going to use this ultimate slice your ear off word with Van Gogh, a tragic artist of beauty. Very tote-baggable, very, it's an amazing contradiction. This totally tortured man who had a mental illness is like seen to be like the happy kind of God sitting on our shoulders who spreads joy in those like awful hallucinogenic sort of giant displays that you may have heard about where you can see his sunflowers 20 feet tall, et cetera, that my students for some reason always ask me if I've gone to see. Is Alice Baber tragic too? The answer would seem to be no, but I don't know. Looking at these little platelets of light, these kind of fish scales, which are very carefully done if you look closely. It's not a Van Gogh tragedy. Alice Baber's not doing that at all, but she grew up on a farm in Illinois, and there was another person, a very famous American writer, who grew up on a farm in Illinois, not far from Alice Baber. And I grew up in St. Louis, so I think I get what they're both thinking about. This famous person, James Jones is his name, who wrote the novel From Here to Eternity, who wrote another novel about World War II called The Thin Red Line. Some of you may have seen that movie, which is a fantastic movie. He said, Alice Baber's making paintings of her childhood in Illinois. It's that Midwest light. That's what he said. It's kind of one of these great moments in art criticism where it's kind of wrong and kind of right at the same time. Like you kind of see it a little bit. But listen to what he says, James Jones. Alice Baber is a painter with a very strong, very basic, tragic sense. That's really interesting. You might be computing here, livingness and tragic. That's interesting. I myself, he says, think she could not tolerate the triteness of painting sorrow in the conventional way. Okay, I like that. That she wanted more than that she wanted to paint sorrow in light, gay colors as nature does. This may sound strange, looking at all these lovely, laughing, brilliant colors she uses. But in looking closer, one can see and feel an almost terrifying poignancy. A near weeping sadness and sorrow in these delicately gay and summer bright colors. It is as if she is trying to tell us about her native Illinois with its brilliant blinding sun, its dust, its summer deep greens. That summer itself will not stay. And there's that Robert Frost poem, Gold Will Not Stay. You sort of fish around in James Jones and you read his World War II South Pacific novels like Thin Red Line. It's not hard to find kind of Alice Baber-like pictures on the battlefield, such as soldier looking up at night. Billions of hard, bright stars shone with relentless glitter all across the tropic night sky. Underneath this brilliant canopy of the universe, the men lay wide awake and waited. I tell my students this is kind of like a constellation. You put one thing with another. It's a fiction, but it kind of makes something you can orient yourself by, like, oh, James Jones, Alice Faber. And more than that, because we're trying to be more than just smart people. We don't want to be cocktail party specialists. We want to actually be the person that is actually upsetting to the cocktail party, in the sense we sort of burst into tears describing works of art and people say, can I make you a cup of tea? That's the person we really want to be. That's my ideal. So it would be to interrupt at maybe in the dessert course and say, what is the relation between livingness and the tragic in James Jones and Alice Faber? And to say it without an ounce of attitude, but as a genuine question. You know? So there is Alice Faber. Herb Gold told me, he almost like rolled his eyes when he said how much preferable she was as a girlfriend to Helen Frankenthaler, but that's a little gossipy. I'm gonna like excise that from the official minutes of whatever it is I'm saying. Anyway. This is interesting, though, this photograph, because she's all alone. You know, I think an interesting artist gesture, but also a kind of quasi-prayerful gesture, and looking up for whatever reason. But then we have these women. And there's the question we move to now, can livingness be sold? Helen, Grace Hardigan, Joan Mitchell, who's not in the show, but this is like all women born in the 1920s who were kind of a triumvirate of very serious, very talented, very no-nonsense artists. And they're being photographed because they're trying to promote their work, which in those days, whether we use the quaint term selling out or not, was kind of a no-no for the big older artists who were men like Rothko, Pollock, even though they were seeking fame themselves. This was a dicey thing they were doing, but it is what they were doing. There's a feature in Esquire magazine, which is, you know, Playboy adjacent, Playboy without the centerfold, magazine for men. This is showing a kind of bohemian artist's collection of bric-a-brac, and, you know, they're talking about New York's spreading, Upper Bohemia. Spreading is an interesting kind of contagion word. I don't know what it means exactly here, but there's Grace Hardigan. Here is another photograph from that same spread. There's Grace Hardigan again. She's talking with Frank O'Hara, a buddy of hers and Frankenthaler's, who was a poet. There's David Smith. We saw him at his winter outpost. There's Larry Rivers, another artist, another painter. This is all about promotion, and the question comes up, and it's so relevant for us, is livingness. I guess we would say it now, can you be genuine and be out there and, you know, making your Instagram post? Or is it fatally flawed at that moment? That's the question. When you go look at these paintings, think about them as coming from this moment of advertising oneself, and, you know, whether that makes the authenticity fall away. In the spread in Life magazine, we know this photograph, of course, but Grace Hardigan appears in a different palette, also photographed by Gordon Parks, less otherworldly perhaps a little less housewifely-like than Helen Frankenthaler, more in terms of her downtown studio, kind of downtown Manhattan, upper Manhattan vibe here, but they are sisters of a kind, each trying to portray, you know, here the life of the street, here some kind of mermaid fantasia of direct emotional contact with the substance of life. They're both promoting themselves. The advertisement that just happens, or maybe not just happens to be right next to the picture of Helen on the right, kind of suggests how Life magazine itself is carefully hedging its bets about what constitutes a woman's right to access this livingness, the pure stream of a creative life that gives to others, that makes the world flow forth, that makes it pop and grow before our eyes. This figure, in short, seems to look a lot like Helen. Could almost think of this as Grace Hartigan, as if to convert all of this wild, existential, personal, artistic visionariness into just some fashion, just a fashion of the day. Editors then as now are very cagey, and they don't want to insult part of the quote-unquote target audience, Life magazine being a kind of internet of its day, like a mass circulated phenomenon. But what I want to suggest here, and hopefully this is uplifting to us all, is that I'm one of these naive people that do believe you can be private in public, that you can stay in touch with your, whatever it is, your sublime artistic genius, and be a public figure and even be mindful of a public. These figures who are shown more candidly in one of their friendlier moments are, I don't know, I feel when I look at the paintings in this museum that I'm in the world of these people, not this glib prepackaged world, but that's up for you to decide. I did want to say, though, that I mentioned at the start that they're frenemies, not friends. And I think this relates to this question of what constitutes life or livingness in art. They had very different opinions. You could call them a downtown vision and an uptown vision. That's stereotypical. But let's just go with it. Grace Hartigan, Massacre, not a cheery title, that's a clue. Big painting in Kansas City now, maybe 3/4 of the size of the projection. Dark palette, kind of expressive brushwork. It makes me think of Grace Hartigan's ideal as a painter, which you can think of when you look at her work here, that it's basically, smoking cigarettes and staring at a canvas in existential isolation on the 5th floor of your walk-up cold water flat in Lower Manhattan. Going through, cycles of coffee-driven despair and exhilaration at your work. That there's a kind of implosion, explosion of that is violent in nature and kind of, it's a dark night of the soul. Then Helen, also 1952. Let's look at what she did. Mountains and Sea, which appears in Parks's photograph too, and is probably the most famous painting she made, and is her so-called breakthrough painting made in an afternoon at age 23. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it's trying to be as light as possible. She had her studio mate come over and said, "Look at this, should I do anything more?" He said, "No." She said, "I agree, I'm not going to do anything more. I'm going to leave it looking like, as the critics said, a wet paint rag, not a painting." But why? Because she's trying to capture something that's light and evanescent. The canvas is on the ground. It's not primed. The oil paint soaks in like watercolor. She's right on top of it. Some people claim to see her butt marks on the canvas. I have never looked that closely. But you get the feeling. It's like freedom as a very light thing, like a bird flying is freedom. Art usually is capturing the bird, crushing it in your fist, and sticking it on the wall. That's why art museums can be so deadly, right? It's where life seems to go to die. So she's concerned with something else. But Grace basically wrote in her diary saying, Helen, I think she's just losing it. I used to think she was talented. And actually Larry Rivers, who appeared in one of those Escar photographs, even had a talking with Helen and said, you know, honey, this is serious. Like, being an artist is tragic. You have to stare in the toilet bowl or do something that's kind of dark. This is not it. And Helen, to her credit, like, she ignored it because for her, there's gravity in trying to catch life, show life on the wing, you know. Show the merging of emotion, flittering of emotion and experience as just the lightest thing, like that, a kind of mirage. When Hartigan, many years later, in an early issue of Miss Magazine, said that Helen's paintings remind her, Helen looks like she made her paintings between cocktails and dinner. That actually hurt Helen's feelings. It has a kind of classist vibe to Grace from, you know, not prestigious background from Newark, New Jersey, and Helen's kind of fancy, wealthy Upper East Side Jewish person. But you can see that they have their differences. Sweden is the name of the painting here. Sweden and Eden. You know, they're competing. That's something we miss. Take a look at the paintings and just remember these people they're hugging, but they're also, in a way, stabbing each other in the back. We kind of miss or forget how gnarly an artist's world can be. And they're not just trying to outstyle one another, they're trying for ultimate stakes. They're both trying to be Edenic first, you know, get back to the primal thing, the religious thing, the real thing, cut through the window decoration notion of art. And just staying with this a moment, it has such an interesting and seemingly random title, Sweden, but that is not random, and I think it relates to our concept of how, you know, that Emily Dickinson phrase about a poem that's really a poem, zero at the bone. All these are zero at the bone paintings. Not 4/2, not even 2/1, like zero at the bone. That's when there's something happening. So Sweden, what is that? You know, the painter Franz Klein, to whom this painting is dedicated, used to come over to Hartigan's studio and say, Grace, you don't look like a painter. You look like a Swedish skier. And it was, you know, charming in the sort of flirtatious banter of the mid-1950s kind of way. But on one of these occasions, Hartigan was working on this very picture, and she was actually fretting. This is interesting. Go look at the painting after you hear what I'm about to say. She was fretting over the fact that she loved this part of the picture. She thought that was awesome, very dark part. And it is fantastic up close. And she hated this part. And she was kind of beginning to go back in and start to rework this, to make it, you can see they're in a dialogue. And she was just really fretting, like, oh, the painting is good, but I got to do something down here. And Klein he said, you know, basically, you loser, like, and she realized then and there that you have to make the picture completely in the enclosure of your inspiration. As soon as you leave it alone for a week and then start to fiddle with it, it's all bets are off, and you're just like a car mechanic, basically, like tuning it, and you've lost the touch. And whatever the touch is, it has to do with the qualities we've been talking about, the genuineness, the livingness. et cetera. And so she understood, okay, I won't do anything to this. And I think she was right, he was right. But this notion of Swedish skier says that this is a self-portrait, right? In a way, not literally, but even trickier in a way we can probably all relate to. It's a self-portrait as someone else sees us, you know? Who, the persona that they give us, in this case, a Swedish skier. And that suggests something about, I'll put it this way, what I said at the start, that a work of art is, it has a clear kind of bloodline connection to the artist, of course. It is of her, but it is also a remote land, you know, a Sweden, somewhere else. It's a self-portrait that is somehow cast away into a strangeness that even the artist herself, you know, cannot fully find her being in. But that makes it good, because then it's free. It's free of all these nasty literal coordinates that govern and often mess with our lives, which is, oh, you're gay. Okay, well then you're there for the this. Or you're a professor, so you're there for the what? What are you talking about? You know, no one wants to be like glued together in such a simplistic fashion, though we consent to it day after day in ways large and small. But no, Sweden, separate. It's like, you know what Grace Hardigan did once when a little poet type guy was like following her around constantly as they were hipsters going from one bar to one restaurant in Lower Manhattan. She punched him in the face. He was just lying in the street, and she did not look back. That's basically the vibe here. Like, yeah, Sweden. You're on your own, you know. Find a place in that chilly country, because it's a call to you or to me as a viewer, as a visitor, to attend to the work and find something in it, in ourselves, that might shape and brace us in our own existence. These are two very different pictures then, two different sensibilities. I would say, just very schematically, that Hardigan's is a kind of breathtakingly dark vision, like a kind of dark gaiety, one might say. And this is some kind of like happiness El Greco style. We've both been there, both places. We would not want to choose as which is the deeper or the richer kind of livingness. You might say that these simply are, and God bless these artists, like a kind of portrayal, not a frozen portrayal, but a living portrayal of the dynamism of our emotional lives. I do want to last say, and there's some young people here tonight, I do want to just make a kind of case for the idea that younger people especially have access to the things I've been talking about tonight. So it's not, well, the paintings you're looking at are made by people who are in their 20s in Helen's case and in their 30s in Grace's case. But if you look at this picture of Helen, who is 31 years old here as she greets a visitor to her first ever one-person exhibition at the Jewish Museum, I'm going to count that, as well I should, as young. I'm twice the age now that she is here. As she stands in front of this picture, Hotel Cro-Magnon, which is in Milwaukee, and which is the single painting that convinced me to write a book on her, because I went to that museum once, I was giving a talk there, and I spent more time in front of that painting, not even knowing why, than the whole rest of the collection put together. And I got off the plane in San Francisco, and I kind of thought, actually someone texted me and said, will you write a little essay on Helen Frankenthaler? And I thought, this is it. It's telling me this is what I should do. But notice telling me not because I'm a scholar or something like that, but because I needed to live through her work, you know. In any case, youth. If you go into that exhibition, you know, this is a simple black and white installation shot of some of the pictures there. See this one here? So that's in Richmond now, Mother Goose Melody. She painted it in a garage in Truro, Massachusetts one summer when she was vacationing. Mother Goose Melody, young, youth, a title she put on afterwards. As you know, that's how she titled, because this abstract form seemed goose-like. Maybe these three forms seemed like her and her two sisters growing up. In any case, youth. We might say, yeah, that makes some sense, maybe just intuitively, that a younger person, in the way that Wordsworth and others would praise, has greater access to the glory, the spontaneity, the immediacy, and that to grow up comes at a hard cost, which is you become blanked and inured to the glory of life. Just, you know, just as an idea. The only problem here for us, which is so interesting, is Helen's show got slammed for this very reason, and she was so upset. And let's look at that and think about that. So the critic in Art News, Anne Seeley, wrote that Helen, looking at pictures like this, is a child of the times, romantic, hypersensitive, sulky, and that she, moreover, without even knowing it, portrays new currents in American culture where the cult of adolescence is taking over the entertainment world and shaping our responses to love, which, if you buy that in 1960, you're thinking, wow, 2025, like it's at a whole new level, right? Okay. Anyway, Helen was upset. Okay, not a nice review. I think it was like a lot of not nice reviews, though. It was very perceptive, much more perceptive than praise a lot of times. And let's just think about it, especially Match for New Currents in American Culture. It's true, some of the great heroes from that moment are adolescents, are young people. I had never read Salinger's Catcher in the Rye until recently, since I have a kind of allergy and aversion to any story concerning a prep school. Not because I went to one, but precisely because I'm a public school person through and through, from kindergarten to senior year of college, and I just can't quite get over my bad feelings about prep schools. Anyway, it's a great book. That's my point. Like, wow, unbelievable. Try it out. It's pretty great. But yes, a young hero, Rebel Without a Cause, the great Red Windbreaker. Red all over Nicholas Ray's film, which came out, look at the year. That's a year we know, right? Because Blue Territory is from it. Natalie Wood. The lipstick, so intense, given a kind of Technicolor boost, basically almost like detaching from her lips, red. All of what Anne Seeley in her review is talking about is true, like the melodramatic truth of adolescence, which I believe in as a super sign of what it means to be alive. If you look at Helen's painting from 1959, which used to be at Bennington Red Square, look at that. You know, it's not the Red Square of Moscow, it's more of a red square like this. I think, you know, one reason Helen was so upset, one reason why she conscripted her friends to write letters to the editor of Art News telling the editor how much they hated Anne Seeley's review, because Helen was very defensive and insecure about her art. She should not have been, but she was. Is that is that Anne Seeley was right, but I'm praising that rightness. I'm saying, yes, Helen's work is connecting adolescence, youth more generally, to livingness. I think her greatest art is from the 1950s when she was young, even though she painted all the way until the early 2000s. Seeley says the paintings seem to be making an attempt to tell the truth, but they are truthful in the same sense as were the Confessions of Charles Van Doren. Who's this person? He's a youthful, charismatic young professor who was the star of a game show on television and who charmed everyone by getting everything. It was amazing. The guy knows so much. He's a professor. Professors are so smart. He wins every time. But he knew the answers ahead of time. He was fed the answers because he was good for ratings. And then it came out. So when Seeley says Helen's paintings are truthful in the way that Charles Van Doren is truthful, that's a disaster, right? So I'll let you then go and see and judge the livingness of these pictures according to some of the things I've talked about. If we have time for questions, I'm glad to take them now. I see that Chris has the microphone, so thank you.
I do indeed. I have a microphone. Oh, I see hands. All right.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say thank you so much for your insights, not only into Helen, but into mid-century art and culture. And it was, very enriching experience. And as a historian, I'm always interested in sources. So I'm interested in what type of archives you might have gone to and where, if and where Helen's papers are stored. And finally, one mini question. From an art history course I took, I remember something about Helen using a soak and stain or stain and soak type of technique. So I don't know if you can address that too. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. So the second question first, soak and stain, yeah, they all have elements of that, mountains and sea in particular. Joan Mitchell, the third artist in that triumvirate of women sitting on the settee, hated Helen and used to call her that Kotex painter. So, and other people thought that the staining was very, in ways that are complicated, but were meant to be very critical from her detractors, feminine, like just, feminine in a quote unquote light way. But what they didn't understand, and Joan Mitchell's a great painter, she was just feisty as all get out. And probably among all artists ever recorded is probably the world leader in F-bombs. I think they didn't understand that light staining, just getting something, and then that takes a lot of guts and skill. On the first question, Sonia Rudikoff, whose page I showed of doodles and notes, that's really was the gem of an archive for me. It's at Princeton, and it's because Helen wrote to her constantly. And my initial idea for a book was, I told my agent, well, I want to write a book that's about Helen every year of 1950s, focusing on one day per year. And it's just going to be sweet and simple like that, which is exactly what the book turned out to be. And the Rudikoff, I then went to the Rudikoff papers because I could then pick my days based on her letters, which are very detailed. So other archives in play, but that was the big one. Yeah, thank you.
All right, let me know if you have a question.
There is so much that you said that's given me things to think about. And I wish that I'd been able to comment as you were speaking, because so much of what you had to say evoked responses in me that now I can't remember what they are. But one thing this idea of the livingness of the painting is something that I'm going to ponder for quite a while. At this point, to kind of define it, I'm thinking of it as like the performance of a moment. And I really appreciated what you said about you can't go back later and rework it because the moment has passed. You can only create it in that moment. And then later, it's a different moment.
Yes, that's nice. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, do you want me to comment on that?
Sure, but I have more, but
please
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll remember that one. Okay, yeah.
The thing about that idea of the performance of a moment is that a performance by necessity has an audience. And so maybe that contributes as well to the livingness because it invites a response and the participation of a viewer. And so the thing lives on with everyone who observes it and interprets it and assimilates it. And it kind of relates to this idea that Roland Barthes expressed about the death of the author in literary criticism, that a work of literature is really not about the writer and his biography, but it's about the experience of the reader and how the reader's knowledge and experience actually contribute to his appreciation of the work. And with every new reader, it's kind of reborn. I think the same might be true of these paintings. And
I love that, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's such a beautiful addition to what I was saying, and I'll just comment on it briefly by saying, I think you're so right, and Helen's word for this would be gift. The work of art is a gift. And, you know, Robert Frost has a line about this where he's leading people up into the mountains. Art requires a journey. That's what artists say, and it's true. So when you see someone who spends 2 seconds and says, I don't get it, that just means they don't want to take the journey. They don't want to go up into the mountains. Fine, it's a free country. Don't. Like, more power to you. It's cool. But let's just be clear that the difficulty is the reward. So anyway, led up into the mountains, and what Frost says is the nice things up there are hidden. And this is what he says. You might not agree with his premise. It sounds a little bit haughty, but I believe in it. He says, so the wrong ones can't find them, so can't get saved. So the things up there high are not just lying around like it's a vending machine, just put a quarter in and give me my stuff. They're hidden. So the wrong ones can't find them, so cannot get saved. He says, as St. Mark says they mustn't, which I could comment on also. But anyway, for the person who does find it, and it could be anyone, you know, we've all had the experience, you're having a bad day, maybe a bad week, maybe a bad year, and you walk into a museum not expecting anything and suddenly you're in tears. Yeah, you're the right one at that point. Maybe you were the wrong one for 10 years, for your whole life. One day, gift style, the painting is there. That's what I tell my students. You know, I teach in the heart of Silicon Valley, so let's just say oil painting is not really a big thing there. But I always point out, trying to be not exactly mean about it, but you know, most days you don't need art. I agree. But there is a day when you do, and it will potentially be a gift to you, and you will, to now come around, make it in your own mind. And I, having grown up in the 70s and 80s, like I like to watch concert videos from that era, from, you know, Led Zeppelin and things like that from on YouTube. And what I noticed per your question is how the music really comes to life in the expressions of the people who are listening to it. It's made, incarnated in the reception, and she would say the same thing. But one last thing, I would disagree with Roland Barthes and say that that there's a death of the artist or death of the author. I think the work of art draws one to it as a kind of gravitational center, and without it, our response, our life-giving, even life-saving response, it wouldn't happen. Works of art are centers of gravity. What do we say? They draw us in, they suck us in. Yeah, well, if you think about that, they're bringing us into their gravitational pull. They're giving us the gravity, but also the lightness, the grace. And these pictures here come from a culture like our own that's severely monetized, severely administered. Every last emotion you or I could ever have has already been predicted and algorithmically designed so that it's no longer our own. They're trying to find something that's not administered. And that's the ethical, moral ambition of these works of art. And that is their gift. And, if we don't heed that or acknowledge it, this is what I tell my students, then it's, how to say it, like, we're choosing to be deprived of the light. We're choosing to be defined. We're choosing to understand who we are purely in terms of our driver's license and our passport, legal and civic identity, and it's not enough. It's just not enough. It'll get you only so far. Yeah,
right.
Question down here, or go. Well, whichever's
right.
first. Yeah,
we have
thanks.
time for maybe one or two more questions.
Sure.
Thanks. Fascinating and illuminating. I found it really interesting that you so often explain these various styles of livingness in terms of novelists and poets' words.
Mm-hmm.
And I do often think about those paintings, of all the four of them, as different poetic styles of livingness.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering about that. I find it interesting that, at least as you presented Helen, she resented representationalism, or at least
Yes, she did.
the attempt to think about her work in representational
Yes.
terms. And yet I find those works often in different ways to speak to us a little bit in the same way that poems do. So they don't just suck us in, but there's something.
Yes, that's nice.
It's on the verge of language. There is some kind of a way of speaking to us in particular ways, not just moving us, but moving us through something in the domain of poetic
they're
language.
not prosaic, they're poetic.
Yeah.
Her titles are very evocative, poetic, and I take that to mean open-ended, but not so open-ended that they could mean anything at all. I think that's always a trick for my students, especially in Silicon Valley. The typical way to despise the arts, it's very simple, is to say, well, then it could mean anything at all. Who cares? It has no urgency. It's just, dismissible in those terms. What of course is missing there is the idea that a poem, for example, or a painting creates a very specific form of openness that has the gravity of a pool in the woods at twilight. Every work of art that moves you, you come to a little space, the dusk is reflected in the cold brown water, whatever it is. And it's existentially isolating and yet glorious, and you come out of that space a different person. And I will say, that's the only thing I teach to my students in different versions, but it's the only thing. I don't even teach art history anymore, because I want to find what you're talking about. Yeah. Last question up here, or one over here.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to write this down,
Yeah.
so I'll be looking down. But you talked, like, a lot of Helen Frankenthaler's work, and like a lot of the work that you talked about is abstract art. And I like to think I'm somebody who's more analytic. Like, I kind of need the answers to be given to me, kind of, or like some way to figure it out. And I feel like abstract art doesn't really speak to everybody, and like, kind of to the people who are like, cannot figure it out. And you also talked about like, needing people taking the hard journey and not it being easy to get there. But then you also talk about the idea of livingness, and everybody experiences it differently. So do you think Helen Frankenthaler's work is only for a specific kind of audience, or for a more elite audience who have the time to kind of think about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's a kind of elitist conception that implies some kind of culture, let's call it, and some kind of recognition of something that's not popularly accessible. And why couldn't we go see Rebel Without a Cause and have a kind of clear narrative portrayal of the same kind of loneliness and exhilaration that this very difficult abstraction is showing? Yeah, I love that question. As someone whose favorite movie is called Curse of the Cat People, I think I could be understood to, if you'll allow the expression, bridge the gap between the high flown and the publicly accessible. And I would say further that, however, that the critique is finally really open. Your point is valid, and it's certainly a viable way of seeing her work, and in fact, all this work. I think with my students, I work on the following formulation, however, which is so counterintuitive, which is that the democratic thing, like let's make it accessible to everyone, is often the most limiting and damaging thing, because it treats us all, it treats, for example, all of you as a crowd, not individual people. And as soon as you're a crowd, you're just an abstraction to me, and I don't have any connection to you really personally. It's just an abstraction. Whereas, per the previous question about, giving a gift, this is saying more something like there's someone out there whose heart can be pierced by this. And it's a kind of cry in the wilderness a little bit, which feels to me, per your question, much more isolating and particular, and if you like, boutique. And yet the personal always enters into a person more vividly than being algorithmically or otherwise designated part of a quote-unquote target audience. No one likes that. We could talk about it more, but I would just say one last thing. I was talking to a poet friend of mine who's a very beautiful person in her 40s, super intense, way more intense than I am. And she was talking about being at this meeting of other poets laureate. She's the poet laureate of her state. So all the poets from the different states come together. And this gets to your question. She was just telling me she couldn't believe it that all the poets were talking about the main thing they needed to do was to have workshops for little kids and get everyone writing poetry. And you could say, what's wrong with that? And my friend said, I just want to read one of my poems in a way that breaks people's heart. Like, I'm not here to do workshops to like make this like poetry be the new thing. So everyone's doing poetry. No. And the takeaway from that is that poets and artists are, if you like, not a popular view from me, but still, are these kind of singular, odd, and in a way aristocratic beings who have something to say that the rest of us know the emotional truth of, but cannot express ourselves. Emerson, the philosopher, has a phrase very helpful in this context from the 1840s. In this, our talking America, it's democratic, everyone does their thing. We are ruined by listening on all sides. If you made a painting or wrote a poem and then circulated it to everyone here, and then took in their quote unquote feedback in the most conscientious, liberal, democratic way, your poem would fall apart. So you have to have the courage to speak alone in the wilderness and understand that people respond most democratically, most liberally to what is unique and alone, because they recognize themselves in that. So there's a lot of philosophy behind what I just said, but it comes down to the idea that being good people, we all want to not be narcissistic and kind of, speak to the common person, average out our intelligence. That seems very democratic, but it's not. It's very distasteful to the people you're trying to reach. The real way to be democratic, and this is counterintuitive, is to speak from the heart, speak as you alone. And is there a danger that you will be a narcissistic fraud who is not, as we say, sufficiently self-aware? Yeah, there's a big danger. But there's always the chance that you'll say something that will save another person, the viewer out there somewhere, because it will be as though you spoke to them alone. And last anecdote, the actor Ben Kingsley was playing one of the Shakespearean heroes on Stratford-upon-Avon. It's a weeks-long production. He's appearing every night, as actors will do in the daytime. He's just taking a stroll. And he sees someone who's seen the play the night before, and she comes up to him and says, "How did you know what I was thinking?" That's art, right? It's just one-on-one. How did you know all about my life? That's where it happens. I'm going to stop there. Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.